Hi everyone, I'm Julia Green. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Environmental Science at the University of Arizona. And today I'm going to be presenting to you a lecture on interpretable machine learning in carbon cycle science. A common complaint that you might hear from critics of machine learning algorithms is that they're black boxes. You throw a bunch of inputs into a model, they go into a dark void, no one has any idea what happens in that void, and then voila, magic, you get your output. As a result, you'll sometimes hear people questioning their usefulness because these people don't know how the model arrived at its answer. However, machine learning algorithms don't have to be like that. There are various methods available to understand how the different variables used as predictors interact with each other to arrive at a final prediction. To illustrate this concept, in this presentation, I'm going to be using a study that I authored in 2020 in Science Advances, in which we used machine learning algorithms to understand the drivers of photosynthesis in the Amazon rainforest. This study is also listed in the suggested reading list at the end of this book chapter if you would like more information on it. This research project was a collaboration with my colleagues, Joe Barry, previously at the Carnegie Institute, Yao Zhang, a professor at Peking University in China, Philippe Sier, who is a research scientist at LSCE in France, and Pierre Gentin, a professor at Columbia University. And for this project, we wanted to address the following two questions. First, how do models represent photosynthetic sensitivity to air dryness versus soil dryness in the tropical Americas? And then second, we wanted to know if we could confirm if what the models were showing was true using observational data. And throughout this presentation, I'm going to be using the acronym GPP, which stands for gross primary production when I'm talking about photosynthesis and carbon uptake. And I'm going to use the acronym VPD, which stands for vapor pressure deficit when I'm talking about air dryness. So why did we choose to focus on the Amazon rainforest and the tropical Americas for this project? Well, the Amazon rainforest is a hotspot for carbon storage. It stores a lot of above ground biomass, as you can see from this figure here, which is from a paper that came out in PNAS in 2011. However, its future and ability to continue sequestering these large amounts of carbon is unclear with anthropogenic climate change, putting stress on the ecosystem. And if the Amazon rainforest stopped being able to store these vast amounts of carbon, there could be large feedbacks with the Earth system because it would mean that more carbon dioxide would be staying up in the atmosphere, and that could greatly accelerate global warming. So how exactly is the climate changing in the tropical Americas? Well, air dryness is increasing globally. This top plot is showing global temperature trends over the last 35 years. The second plot is showing the increasing trend in specific humidity. And the third plot is showing the decrease in relative humidity. And these are from a 2018 paper in PNAS. Again, all of these trends point to air dryness or vapor pressure deficit increasing globally. Meanwhile, changes in precipitation and soil moisture are much more varied. So this plot here on the right is showing the simulated changes in annual mean precipitation for 1.5 degrees warming relative to a baseline period of 1850 to 1900. And this is from the IPCC Physical Science Report, which was published in 2021. And as you can see, some regions are getting wetter, others are getting drier, and there's no obvious consistent global trend like there is with air dryness. And so we would like to know how these changes in water demand and availability will impact the ability of the tropical Americas to take in carbon. Now, despite the fact that VPD and precipitation are predicted to change differently in the future, frequently air dryness and precip are viewed as one forcing on photosynthesis in models. And that's because they tend to be anti-correlated. So that's what this plot is showing here. It's a time series of monthly data from a location in the Amazon rainforest from 2000 to 2005. The blue line is precipitation data from GPCC, and the red line is vapor pressure deficit, calculated from ERA 5 reanalysis data. And you can see that if precipitation goes up, air dryness tends to go down, and vice versa. And due to this strong anti-correlation, models have largely gotten away with not representing the impacts of VPD and precipitation separately on vegetation productivity. However, if VPD is projected to change differently in the future than precipitation, it becomes essential not to just lump together their effects on photosynthesis in the modeling world, but to understand how Amazon photosynthesis will respond to both VPD and precipitation separately by decoupling their effects. So we very quickly realized that if we wanted to try and decouple the effects of VPD and precipitation on GPP in the tropical Americas, we couldn't just use a simple pixel-wise multiple linear regression model to address this. One reason being the strong anti-correlation between VPD and precipitation. Correlated predictors in a linear regression model can create huge problems when trying to interpret model output. But there was actually a second reason as well. And that is the influence of precipitation and air dryness in photosynthesis. It isn't linear. So that's what this figure here is showing. It's the relationship between GPP and VPD for a sample pixel in the Amazon rainforest from the CESM model. And as you can see, this is not a linear relationship. So again, a pixel by pixel linear regression model was not going to work here. And so to address both of these issues, we turned to machine learning. So starting with issue number one, the fact that VPD and soil moisture are highly anti-correlated, we realized that one way we could handle this was rather than to create a model to predict photosynthesis at every pixel location across our map with precipitation and VPD as predictors, we instead decided that we would first cluster our study area into regions that were functionally and climatically consistent in space and time, and then we would create an individual model for predicting photosynthesis for each cluster instead of each pixel. And by doing so, we would increase the amount of data for analysis per model, and we could reduce the issues of the strong temporal anti-correlation between VPD and precip that would be present in a single pixel. So to do this, we used a machine learning algorithm called k-means clustering, which is a method of vector quantization that works to create clusters that minimize the distance of each data point to the cluster mean. And this image here on the bottom right is depicting a very simplified version of how that works. The first plot is showing the before picture, while the second plot is after clustering if we used 3 clusters. And so we applied this. For inputs to our clustering algorithm, we use these data sets listed here on the right, and we clustered the study area using both their mean values as well as their variability. And after doing so, we ended up with the following 8 clusters shown here on the left. And they're ranked in terms of the amount of precipitation they receive. So cluster 1, or the black areas, those are the wettest parts of the region, and cluster 8, those are the driest. And so if I can direct your attention now to this figure on the bottom left, what this is showing is the absolute value of the correlation between VPD and precip averaged across each pixel within a cluster in blue, and then the correlation using all pixels per cluster together in orange. And what you can see is that by clustering the data, so those bars in orange, we do indeed reduce the correlation between precip and VPD. So now that we successfully reduced that strong relationship between precip and VPD, allowing us to better separate their effects on photosynthesis, we now needed to come up with an approach to model these interactions that could account for the nonlinear dynamics of the system. And so the solution we used was another machine learning algorithm called artificial neural networks. Now, artificial neural networks are inspired by the human brain and are comprised of node layers containing an input layer, one or more hidden layers, and an output layer. Each node or artificial neuron connects to another and has an associated weight and threshold. If the output of any individual node is above the specified threshold value, that node is activated, sending data to the next layer of the network. Otherwise, no data is passed along to the next layer. Neural networks need to be trained before they can first make predictions, and they can work with nonlinear relationships between variables. So that's the big reason why we chose this type of model for our analysis. And so we created an artificial neural network for each of those clusters that we defined, which are shown on the top right, where we use different environmental variables related to climate and vegetation structure to predict GPP. And the predictors that we used are listed in these tables. And we used 10 Earth system models from the CMIP-5 historical simulations to run these artificial neural networks for the time period of 1976 to 2005. And so for each model, we trained one artificial neural network per cluster using 60% of the data, and we used 5 nodes and 3 hidden layers. We needed hidden layers for these models because the relationships between the variables was not linear, and we chose a number of nodes based on the rule of thumb to have a number of neurons between 1 and the number of predictors in the artificial neural network, which is 6 here. So now we come back to this question of interpretability. How can we not just use our model for a prediction, but also understand how each predictor variable is influencing that final prediction? And the way that we chose to handle this was to perform a sensitivity analysis involving variable perturbations. So the first thing that we did in step 1 was for each Earth system model per cluster, we predicted the GPP data using the trained artificial neural network. In step 2, we perturbed one of the predictor variables by 1 standard deviation and then predicted the GPP again. In step 3, we took those results from steps 1 and 2 and transformed the cluster data back to their pixel locations to create 2 maps. And in step 4, we took those maps from step 3 and we used this equation here at the bottom to calculate the percent variability in GPP explained by the predictor variables that was perturbed in the models. We then repeated this process for all predictor variables in the artificial neural network and repeated this for all 10 Earth system models, giving us the percentage of variability in GPP explained by each predictor variable. Once we had that, by transforming these results back to their pixel locations, it allowed us to generate maps of the median sensitivities across the 10 CMIP-5 models. And so that's what we have here for the dry season. The sensitivity is defined as positive if in the perturbation analysis, increasing a predictor by a standard deviation led to an increase in GPP, and it was defined as negative if increasing a variable by a standard deviation decreased the predicted GPP. And you can see if we start on the left-hand side of this figure, the Earth system models show a positive sensitivity of GPP to precipitation throughout the study area. And then on the right-hand side, you can see that Earth system models showed a negative sensitivity of GPP to VPD almost everywhere. And so now we came to our follow-up question, which was, do observations confirm what the Earth system models are showing? And so we took a similar approach to what I already showed you with the Earth system models, but rather than trying to use artificial neural networks to predict GPP data, we use solar-induced fluorescence, or SIF, as a proxy for it. And here is our list of predictor variables, again listed in these tables on the right. We again ran one artificial neural network per cluster to predict the SIF data, again using 5 nodes and 3 hidden layers for each artificial neural network, and trained them using 60% of the data. We also repeated the perturbation analysis to understand how each predictor variable was influencing the prediction of the SIF data and transformed the data back to their pixel locations. In doing so, we could now create observational sensitivity maps that we could compare to the Earth system model sensitivity results. And so that's what this is showing here for the dry season. The top row are the observational results, and the bottom row are the Earth system model results. And what you can see right away is that the observational results look quite different than the Earth system models. The observational results are suggesting that the Earth system models are overestimating the positive influence of precipitation on GPP in the wettest parts of the rainforest, while simultaneously the models are overestimating the negative influence of VPD. And if you'd like more information on what this means in terms of the accuracy of model predictions in this region, or why models might not be capturing these sensitivities correctly, I would again direct you to this paper, which is in the suggested reading list at the end of this chapter. Now, in this presentation, I've showed you one method of interpreting variable interactions in a machine learning algorithm, which was a perturbation analysis. But there are other methods out there also at your disposal. In this textbook chapter, I also cover partial dependence plots, which depict the functional relationship between a predictor variable and the predictions. And what's really cool about them is that they're very visual, so they can be easier to interpret than other methods, and they can be applied to the output of many different machine learning algorithms. A third method that I cover in this textbook chapter are also shapely values, which depict the functional relationship between a predictor variable and the predictions, and these are actually based on game theory. These output can also be very visual and can be applied to the output of many different machine learning algorithms, also making them a quite nice model to use. However, they can be very computationally expensive. So just to summarize what we've gone over here today, here what we did was we used the machine learning algorithm k-means clustering to reduce the correlation between precipitation and air dryness. And then we used artificial neural networks to model photosynthetic activity per cluster to be able to investigate the individual nonlinear impacts of precipitation and VPD on photosynthesis in both Earth system models and observations. In this way, we dealt with two issues. First, the anti-correlated predictors, and second, the nonlinear relationships between the variables. We then used a sensitivity analysis based on variable perturbations to understand how the individual predictors were contributing to the final predictions of GPP to answer our research questions. However, other methods of explaining model results also exist, and we very briefly went over the use of partial dependence plots and shapely values. Again, for more information, you can review the textbook chapter as well as the suggested reading list. And I just want to thank you all for your attention today.